We continue now at the top of Daf Samech Aleph Amid Beis in Meseches Nazir. This is Nazir Daf 61b. The Gemara is discussing how we know that an Oved Kochavim is not included in the laws of Nazirus. How do we know that a non-Jew is not included in the laws of Nazirus? And so the Gemara says, Yotza Oved Kochavim, we exclude an Oved Kochavim, She'ein lo Tumah, because the Pasuk by Nazirus talks about Tumah, and an Oved Kochavim is not involved in the laws of Tumah. Rashi explains, Yotza Oved Kochavim, She'ein lo Tumah, Shem Naga b'meis Eino Tameh. The halacha by an Oved Kochavim, by a non-Jew, is that if he touches a dead body, he's not going to be Tameh, and therefore he's not included in the laws of Nazirus either. And the Gemara says, Menolon deleslu tumah, so from where do we know that an Oved Kochavim has no tumah? And the Gemara says, the Yamar Kratz, because the Pasuk says, V'isha shar yitma v'lo yischata, v'nichrasa nefesh ha'hi mitoch ha'kohol. It uses the word kohol when it talks about tumah, the word kohol meaning congregation, and we understand that to mean v'misha yeshlo kohol. It has to be somebody who's part of the congregation. Yotza zeh, that excludes the Oved Kochavim. It excludes the idol worshiper, the non-Jew. She'ein lo kahal, that he's not a part of the kahal, he's not a part of the congregation, the community, and therefore he's not included in the laws of tumah. But the Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know that's what the Pasuk means to say? Dil makaris hu dilo mechayiv. Maybe all the Pasuk is saying is that if an Oved Kochavim is Tameh and he enters the Beis HaMikdash, so he's not going to be chayiv kares, because that is the context of the Pasuk. The Pasuk says, V'nichrasa nefesh hahi mitoch hakol. So maybe it just means that he's not chayiv kares. Avol itzmuye mitzmu, but maybe when it comes to a non-Jew, they are able to become Tameh Meis. And the Gemara answers, no, there's another source, Amar Kra, because the Pasuk says, V'hiza hator al hatame, it says that the pure one will sprinkle on the person that is impure, and we understand from that, Kol sheyesh lo tahara, yesh lo tumah, anybody who's part of the purification process can also become impure. V'chol she'ein lo tahara, but anybody who does not have the purification process, ein lo tumah, so that person is not able to become tameh. And so therefore we learn out from that pasuk that there's no tumas meis when it comes to an Oved Kochavim. But the Gemara says, how do you know? Ve'ema taharahu delo havile. Maybe what we just mean to say is that there's no purification. But tumah havile, maybe there is tumah when it comes to an Oved Kochavim. And so the Gemara quotes another source, Amar Kratz, because the pasuk says, V'isha shar yitma v'lo yischat. It says he's tamei and he doesn't become purified. And so we compare the two to one another, and therefore just like there's no purification, there also is no tumah. And the Rosh explains, V'chol she'ein lo tahara, ein lo tumah. Anybody who doesn't have purification does not have tumah. V'oved Kochavim ein lo tahara. We know that an Oved Kochavim has no purification. T'chsiv v'haisa l'bnei Yisrael l'mishmeres l'mei nida. Because when it talks about purification, it says bnei Yisrael. Mashma l'bnei Yisrael v'lo l'ovdei Kochavim. Sounds like that's a halacha by bnei Yisrael and not ovdei Kochavim. But then the Gemara said, V'dilma taharahu d'lo havelahu. Maybe they just don't have purification. Hatumah havelahu, but they do have tumah. Ukra de v'hiza hatar. That pasuk that you brought of v'hiza hatar lo miyasir. Maybe that's not an extra pasuk. To v'perakama de yuma darish le Rabbi Kiva v'Rabbanan l'drasha achrisi. Because in the first parak of Yuma, Rabbi Kiva and the Rabbanan used that for another drasha. And then the Gemara quoted a different pasuk, Isha shar yitma v'lo yischata, iskish tumah l'tahara. This pasuk is comparing tumah to tahara. Ukra yiseiruhu l'midrash. It's an extra pasuk, and we make this drasha, and therefore again we understand that an Oved Kochavim does not have tumah. And the Gemara continues, Rav Acha bar Yaakov Amar, Rav Acha bar Yaakov says, he gives another answer how we know that Oved Kochavim is not part of the laws of Nazirus. Shani Hach, it's different over here. The Amar Kra, because the pasuk says, V'snachaltem osam levnechem acharechem. It's talking about when a person dies and his avodim get transferred as an inheritance to his sons. And we understand that to mean, Kol sheyesh lo nachla, anyone who has this kind of inheritance, meaning the slaves go from the father to the son, yesh lo tumah, so then there's a halacha of tumah. V'chol she'ein lo nachla, but if you have an individual like an Oved Kochavim, a non-Jew, where this kind of nachla does not apply, the avodim are not given over as an inheritance to the children, so ein lo tumah, so there's no laws of tumah, and also again, there are no laws regarding Nazirus. But the Gemara says if that's the source, if so avodim namilo, then slaves also should not be part of Nazirus, because they're also not part of this halacha of nachala. And the Rosh explains, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, Mahader Ashinuya de Le'el. Rav Acha bar Yaakov is actually going back to the answer we gave earlier in terms of how we know that an Oved Kochavim cannot become a Nazir. We said earlier, Mishi Yeshlo Av Le'inyan Yerusha. We said earlier that it only applies to somebody who has a father in terms of the laws of inheritance. Uparachlein, the Gemara had asked on that answer, Mehad Rabbi Yochanan, from that which Rabbi Yochanan said, said, Diyamar Oved Kochavim Yoresh Asav Devar Torah. Because Rabbi Yochanan said that there is Yerusha, there is a concept of inheritance by Oved Kochavim, and Oved Kochavim does inherit his father on a Doraisa level, and that's what Rav Acha is coming to say. V'yasser Rav Acha l'shenuye. So Rav Acha is coming to answer, to explain, Hachpirchi, he's getting rid of this refutation. V'lo kashal ha'shenuye. It's not difficult. To Misha yesh lo av l'chol din Yerusha ha'amura b'Torah. What we mean is the person has to have a father in terms of all the laws of inheritance, and an Oved Kochavim doesn't have all of the laws of inheritance. Af l'inyan lahanchil avdo livno. Even for the law of giving over the slave to his son as an inheritance, that halach has to apply as well. Yesh lo tuma, only over there are there halachas of tuma. V'yeshno b'chlal lo aviv u'le'imo lo yitama, and then he would be included in lo aviv u'le'imo lo yitama, and therefore also be included in the laws of Nazirus. The Oved Kochavim eino bechlal nachal azula hanchil avdo livno. But when it comes to an Oved Kochavim, he does not give his slave as an inheritance over to his son. Sharei afli atzmo lo gufa eved konim, because even really to himself, the gufa eved, the actual eved, is not really acquired. Kid darshinan begitin, that's a drush in Gittin perak hashaleach. Atem konim mehem velohem konim mikem velohem konim zemizeh. Again, there's no kinyan by an Oved Kochavim in that regard. Hilkach eino bechlal lo yaviv uleimo lo yitama. Therefore, he's not included in the pasuk of liyaviv uleimo lo yitama, which is the pasuk again by Nazirus. And then the Gemara asked him, Cain, if that was the case, so avodim nami lamato mehai kros, so slaves also should be excluded. Shagam evidim nosnu lo evid almanas she'ein l'rabu rishus bo eino morisha levno, because in evid also the slave is not going to transfer to his son. Kineforishus v'lohem konim zamizel, like I just explained. But then the Rush continues v'kashali, but this explanation is difficult. The dafka gabe ovde kochavim hu damrinan v'lohem konim zamizel ve'evid yotzim echlal oved kochavim. This halacha really that there's no acquisition in terms of avodim is only true by a non-Jew. It's not true by an evid. Well, dine kinyonim dino Yisrael. Actually, an evid is treated like a Yisrael when it comes to kinyonim, and so the Rush offers another explanation. V'nira lila farish da avodim einam bechlal shum yerusha. Could be that the avodim, they're not really included in any inheritance. V'lo yoresh aviv v'lo morish mimono livno. They don't inherit. He doesn't inherit his father. He doesn't give over to his son. The evid ein lo yoresh. There is no yoresh by evid. Ulil nami havimatzi lemifrach achpircha. According to this approach of the Rush, we could have asked this question originally earlier. Ala difrach shinuya, rather. But that answer had already been refuted in a different fashion, so we don't ask that question. Now that Rav Acha has reestablished that answer that we gave before about Yerusha, so we ask from Avodim. And so the Gemara continues, Elam Rava, rather Rava says the actual source, again, how we know that Oved Kochavim is not part of the laws of Nazirus is from the same source we brought originally, but the question then was, we had a question from Erchin on that source. And Rava explains, Bishlama Gabe Erchin, I understand by Erchin, Shenamar B'nai Yisrael. So there also, it says the term B'nai Yisrael by Nazirus, and it says the term B'nai Yisrael by Erchin. And the problem was, when it comes to Erchin, so Oved Kochavim is not totally excluded from Erchin, even though it says B'nai Yisrael, because as we said on the previous Amud, it says the word Ish, and it does include Oved Kochavim in some ways when it comes to Erchin, but that's only true by Erchin, because by Erchin it says B'nai Yisrael, and we understand, B'nai Yisrael ma'arichin ve'ino Oved Kochavim ma'arichin, the Jewish people are able to say that they're able to give an erech, meaning they can say, my erech, my value, I'm donating to the Beis HaMikdash. And Ovdei Kochavim can't do that. They can't declare that I'm giving my value to the Beis HaMikdash. That's what we understand from the term B'nai Yisrael. Yachol lo yu ne'erachin. Now I might think that Ovdei Kochavim are totally excluded from Erchin, and they can't even be ne'erachin, meaning if a Jew would declare that he's giving the erech of the non-Jew to the Beis HaMikdash, I might think that doesn't work. Talmud lo mar ish, so the pasuk says ish. So in other words, it makes sense by Erchin to say that in some ways they're included in Erchin, the Ovdei Kochavim, because they are ne'erachin. You can use their value as a basis for how much you're donating to the Beis HaMikdash. But Eino Ovdei Kochavim Ma'arichin, they themselves are not actually able to make that declaration and say that they're giving their erech, they're giving an erech, they're giving this value to the Beis HaMikdash. But that you can say by Erchin. But over here, you can't make such a drasha. Here it's actually going to be that the Ovdei Kochavim from the term B'nai Yisrael are completely excluded from Nazirus. Because here, what are you going to say? B'nai Yisrael knows Renumavi and Carbon. The alternative would be to say something as follows, that B'nai Yisrael means that only Jewish people can bring the carbon of Nazirus. They know Ovdei Kochavim knows Renumavi and Carbon. When it comes to Ovdei Kochavim, so they don't bring the carbonos related to Nazirus. Yachol Aflo Yehu Nazir and Klal. Now I might think they're not part of Nazirus at all. Talmud lo mar ish, the pasuk says ish. That might be an alternative, and then it would turn out that Ovdei Kochavim really are part of Nazirus. That's why it wouldn't have been a good source. And so Rava explains, no, you wouldn't be able to have that alternative. Because over there we would answer, Imi Sham Carbon, because if the pasuk over here by Bnei Yisrael is only excluding the non-Jew from the carbon of Nazirus, Lav Mehacha Nafkala, you don't need to learn it out from here. We already have a different source. Ela Mehasim, it's learned out from over there, a different pasuk. Liola talks about, and Carbonola talks about the fact that non-Jews can bring carbonas, but we say from there, Prat Nazirus, that it excludes Nazirus. We already know they're not part of the carbonas of Nazirus. Divrei Rabbi Yossi Aglili, that's the opinion of Rabbi Yossi Aglili, and so therefore the point of Rava is you can't say when it comes to Nazirus that the Bnei Yisrael is not a good exclusion because they'll be somewhat excluded and somewhat included, because that's not really true over here. They're already excluded from the Karbanos of Nazirus, that we learn out from the word La'ola, and therefore it is clear that Bnei Yisrael is saying that Ovdei Kochavim are completely excluded from Nazirus, and that is the source. But the Gemara says, no, there is an alternative. Ema b'nei Yisrael Nozer Nazirus Olam. Maybe what the pasuk means is that Jewish people, they can have a permanent Nazirus. They know Ovdei Kochavim Nozer Nazirus Olam, but the Ovdei Kochavim, the idol worshippers, they're not able to make a permanent Nazirus. Yachol lo yehu Nazirim. Maybe I would think they're totally not able to be Nazirim. Talmud lo marish, and that's what the pasuk of Ish is saying, meaning that the Ovdei Kochavim would still be included in Nazirus, and maybe this really isn't a good source. We can darshan it just like we do by Erchin, that they're partially excluded in terms of permanent Nazirus, but maybe it doesn't mean that they're totally excluded. And so the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Miksiv Nazir Olam, the pasuk here doesn't say anything about a permanent Nazir, and therefore we would never interpret the pasuk that way. It clearly is actually excluding them completely from the laws of Nazirus. But the Gemara gives a different suggestion. Ema b'nei Yisrael ma'adirim b'neim b'nazir, ve'eno ovdei kochavim ma'adirim b'neim b'nazir. Maybe all it's excluding is saying that Jewish people are able to make their sons into Nazirim, but the non-Jews can't make their sons into Nazirim. Yachol lo yehu Nazirim. Now, I might think they can't be Nazirim at all. Talmud lomar ish. Again, the pasuk says ish, and maybe again, this pasuk does not work as a full exclusion of non-Jews from Nazirus. And to that, the Gemara says, no, we couldn't have said that either. Ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan, because Rabbi Yochanan said, halacha hi b'nazir, that this idea that a father can make a son into a Nazir is a halacha l'Moshe Messinai by Nazir, and so therefore it cannot involve any psukim, and that's not what the pasuk could possibly mean. And the Gemara continues, Ema, there is an alternative, let's say as follows, Bnei Yisrael megalchen al Nazirus Avian. We learned earlier that by Bnei Yisrael, by Jewish people, they can shave on the Nazirus of their father, meaning if their father, let's say, had designated Karbonos for his own Nazirus, and then the father died, so then the son is allowed to use those Karbonos for his own Nazirus. That's what it means, he shaves on the Nazirus of his father. Ve'eno Ovdei Kochavim megalchen al Nazirus Avian. And all the pasuk means to exclude is to say that Ovdei Kochavim, the idol worshippers, the non-Jews, they're not allowed to shave on the Nazirus of their father, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf 61b Daf Aleph.